This is Lama Tantrapa. Welcome to another webinar of our program. And today we're going to discuss breathing. I believe you already experienced exploration of stances, in which we covered in our previous webinar, and benefited from those explorations. Perhaps discovered some things that worked particularly well for you, and perhaps also discovered some things that didn't work for you, so you can discard them or just stop practicing. And now, I also invite you to continue your journey with us by taking the second webinar dedicated to breathing. Our breathing practices will mostly focus on the fundamental principles and also on exploring what works and what doesn't work and why. So that there is nothing that you need to believe in, nothing you take on faith. You just simply experiment and discover for yourself what's true and what isn't. Please make sure to stay through the entire length of this webinar, because at the end of this presentation I will offer you an amazing breathing exercise that I have never offered to the general public before. By and large, as humans, we have 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head, and 1 torso. Most of us have 2 lungs. And today we're going to explore how to work with lungs, how to breathe in a way that is most effective and at the same time provides us the benefits that we're looking for. Now, what are the benefits of breathing? Well, obviously we want to oxygenate our organism, provide oxygen necessary for life, and also expel some of the byproducts of metabolism, such as CO2. I also invite you to enjoy the most natural breathing exercise that I personally find my favorite, and that is smelling flowers. The majority of people living in our contemporary lifestyle have tendency to breathe in a way that is not very effective, and that's why there is such a proliferation of teachers and techniques teaching how to breathe. Most people can learn how to breathe relatively easily because, well, it's one of the most natural things to us humans. However, it's always questionable when there is a technique that says you have to do it this way, and then another technique that says, no, you have to do it that way, sometimes completely opposite. So how do we sort out, how do we figure out what works and what doesn't work? Well, obviously, there are some techniques that work better for people and some don't work so well. And there are some myths that we may also want to debunk, or perhaps simply look at the mistakes that people make when they're trying to breathe. The number one question that I always receive from people who are beginning to explore the breathing practices is whether they're supposed to breathe through the nose or through the mouth. And there is no steadfast rule to answer this question. However, there are certain circumstances under which breathing through the nose is healthier, and under some circumstances it's easier and healthier to breathe through the mouth. For example, if you're smelling the roses or any other fragrant flowers that you enjoy and resonate with, obviously you will be smelling them by breathing through the nose. This is one of my favorite breathing exercises, and I highly encourage you to enjoy smelling flowers as just the most natural experience of inhalation, but don't forget that exhalation is just as important. When you're breathing in a smooth and slow fashion, practicing your abdominal breathing or your so-called natural respiration, you definitely will benefit from breathing through the nose more than the mouth, because the nose will also warm up the air a little bit and clean any dust or other particulates that may be floating in the air. If you're working out and practicing breathing in a more vigorous fashion, for example, as a part of your martial arts practice, obviously breathing through the mouth is going to be easier and more natural for you. However, inhalation through the nose is still highly advised. You will probably find that it's easier to exhale through the mouth, even though you may inhale through the nose. Breathing through the mouth all the time is something that often happens when you are really exerting yourself. For example, when you're running or doing some intense martial art practices. That certainly is an option, and you are welcome to experiment and to find out for yourself what works best for you. Because if you do it the way that works for other people, it doesn't always work for your body the same way. That's exactly the authenticity that I implore you to discover for yourself and employ each and every time you practice. Well, I would say that there are 5 major myths and perhaps 5 major mistakes that people make when they practice breathing. I'll also introduce to you a way that works particularly well, and it's also physiologically sound. It also will enable you to tap into massive flow of energy within your system, which is another major benefit of breathing practices. Number 1 mistake that we will be exploring today is something that is most common and ubiquitous among people living in a contemporary lifestyle, and that is breathing shallow. So in other words, even when practicing breathing exercises, people often tend to still breathe relatively shallow just with the upper part of their lungs. The lungs are almost triangular in shape, with the bottom of the triangle down here. So if you're breathing into the upper chest and shoulders, that literally lifts the upper ribs up and ventilates the top 25-30% of the volume of the lungs. Instead of breathing shallow, we can learn how to breathe deeper. And before we go into the deep breathing, let me just give you a demonstration of what the shallow breathing looks like. You've probably seen plenty of people who are lifting their shoulders while breathing, or perhaps pumping the chest, or perhaps using the muscles of the neck called scalenes. These are relatively small muscles that attach here to the neck and down there to the first several ribs that literally lift the ribs up when contract. And that may create some ventilation of the lungs, but not very much. This is definitely an ineffective and, I would say, detrimental to health, a way of breathing. If we look at the reasons why people breathe this way, most of them boil down to stress. Most people, when they're stressed out, have a tendency to just heave or breathe relatively shallow with the upper part of the chest. When that happens, it doesn't really help relieve stress. As a matter of fact, it may contribute to even greater stress. So in a sense, it adds insult to injury. Instead of this downward spiral of stress, we learn how to reverse this process, or perhaps just eliminate stress in the first place. How do we do that? First of all, we learn about the lungs so that we can function more fully with the full volume of the lungs. If the majority of the lung volume is located at the lower part of the chest, real close to the line dividing the chest cavity from the abdominal cavity, we will be able to ventilate much greater volume and get much more out of each breath, which means we'll be able to get more oxygen and also let go of more CO2. The muscle that facilitates this type of breathing is called diaphragm, specifically a thoracic diaphragm that divides the organs in the thoracic cavity and chest cavity from the organs in your abdomen. And this diaphragm is like a dome. So it has this rounded shape, pretty much going along the edge of the rib cage. When the diaphragm muscle contracts, it becomes flatter, pushing the internal organs further down, opening the lung volume so that you can inhale. Now when you exhale, the muscles of the abdomen, rectus abdominis, the obliques, and the transverse abdominis contract and push the internal organs upwards, which pushes on diaphragm. The diaphragm needs to relax, and that facilitates the exhalation because it presses on the lungs from below. Now, of course, there is also a technique called reverse breathing. We'll talk about it in a few moments. We'll also understand what the diaphragm does on exhalation and on inhalation. which is a really interesting thing to ask people who are supposed to know about breathing. For example, over the course of the years, I've asked literally dozens, if not hundreds, of health professionals this question. Will your diaphragm contract or relax when you exhale? And guess what? Close to 90% give the wrong answer. They actually say that they contract the diaphragm when they're exhaling, when actually the diaphragm needs to relax on exhalation. If you try to contract the diaphragm when you need to relax it, no wonder you'll have a hard time breathing. This is something that needs to be really clearly understood in order to facilitate the diaphragmatic breath. But once you understand it, you'll never go back, because you will discover for yourself a much more efficient and healthy way to breathe. I often receive another interesting question about the length of inhalation and exhalation. And often people tend to exhale for longer periods of time than they inhale. Whenever they are speaking, obviously they are exhaling. Whenever they're singing, they're exhaling. Even when you're meditating and chanting mantras, you're still exhaling. Exhalation is something that often is emphasized more than inhalation in terms of its length. But ideally, the length of inhalation and exhalation would match. I would say if you consider that inhaling air in your lungs is also associated with bringing energy into your body, and exhaling and expelling the CO2 is associated with releasing whatever energy you no longer need, it would stand to reason that there needs to be balance between intake and outflow of this energy. That's exactly why I would encourage you to experiment with exhalation and inhalation at equal lengths of time, and also see if it works better for you to inhale for a little bit longer or exhale for a little bit longer. The length and the duration of inhalation and exhalation is something that you will also have to determine for yourself, because this is what needs to match your body, your organism, and its particular needs at this particular moment in time. Now the second, and also quite interesting and sometimes paradoxical myth and mistake that people make is people think that if they breathe faster, that they will ventilate their lungs more effectively, which is not exactly untrue. They can ventilate their lungs all right, but they often hyperventilate, which leads to closing down of alveoli inside the lungs. Alveoli are little pockets surrounded with tissue that has a lot of blood vessels. These pockets where the air goes allows the blood vessels to receive the oxygen and transport it through the rest of the body, and also expel CO2 into the air inside the lungs, which will be eventually breathed out and expelled out of the lungs. However, if you start breathing too fast, a really strange thing happens. The alveoli start closing down, in a sense, trying to hold onto the CO2. And what happens as a result is that hyperventilation. You may be breathing faster and at the same time not getting much more benefit from that. As a matter of fact, you may get lightheaded, and you may even become unconscious if you keep doing that for too long. I don't want to say that it should never be done. As a matter of fact, there are some techniques of breath work, such as holotropic breath work, developed by Dr. Stan Grof, and some other similar methods that can be interesting to explore in terms of tapping into altered states of consciousness. Because when you start getting lightheaded, you may find yourself in rather interesting states of consciousness, almost getting high. So I don't want to say that it's a bad thing to do. It's just it has its own place. Usually it's done on purpose with a person who facilitates your experience and can also assist you if you go unconscious, or if you start vomiting or doing some other interesting things that will, well, psychologically and physiologically may occur if you do this for a prolonged period of time. So don't try it without any help. However, breathing fast is also natural when we, for example, go for a run or do some other vigorous activity. Let's say I practice martial arts. And when you practice martial arts vigorously enough, your breathing needs to become faster to accommodate for greater circulation in your lungs than is necessary. So again, it's a myth that we don't want to just debunk and throw away. We want to understand that there may be some place that it can be useful. We don't want to throw away the baby with the bathwater, so to say. There is another application of this particular technique. In Tibetan Qigong, it's called thunder breath. And it can, again, be consciously practiced and used for creating massive circulation of qi in your system, and also exchanging the qi with the environment. Because, well, obviously, just like the air in your lungs, it doesn't belong to you. It actually is constantly flowing in and out as you're continuously breathing. You're constantly exchanging the molecules of air within your body and without. That also may lead to some profound spiritual breakthroughs. For example, realizing that the boundary separating yourself, who you think you are, from the rest of the world is rather illusory. I will go into that in much greater detail in our further programs. But now I'm just giving you a little taste of certain practices and certain mistakes that people make. So if you do this consciously and you practice this for a specific purpose, you may be able to benefit from it. However, if you're just practicing too much of breathing too fast, you probably will have it. By the way, I often receive a question about whether to consider the beginning of the breath starting with the inhalation or with the exhalation. Well, let me ask you. If you are a newborn child and you're taking your first breath, what do you begin with? Do you start by inhaling or by exhaling air? That's right. You will inhale the air because you didn't have any to start with. If you take your last breath in your life, what do? Do you inhale or exhale? Well, you may not know personally, but rest assured, you will be exhaling air because your lung capacity will be closing down. What does it mean? It means that the natural beginning of breath is associated with inhalation. However, often when people try to take a breath, they inhale when they already have air in their lungs. So they're kind of trying to put more tea in the teacup that's already full. Isn't this famous Zen anecdote about a scholar who came to the Zen master, and the Zen master treated him to some tea ceremony and kept pouring tea into his full cup. Why? He said, your mind is so full, it's like this cup. You need to empty your cup before you can receive more. Well, similarly, you need to empty your lungs each time before you take serious breath. It means exhaling fully will allow you to inhale fully. However, putting too much emphasis on exhalation also may lead to creating undue tension in your body. So you will have to find out for yourself this sweet spot to which you need to exhale, and you don't need to go much further, and also how much air to put into your lungs, because we don't want to overexert our lungs and our respiratory system. What are mistakes and myths out there? For example, too forceful of breathing. If you're breathing too forcefully, again, you will be potentially ventilating your lungs rather well, just like in the previous example. But you may also strain the breathing muscles. For example, I personally have experienced the diaphragm going into spasm when I tried to breathe a little bit too forcefully, taking a workshop with one of the well-known Qigong masters, and boy, did it hurt for 24 hours. I literally couldn't breathe very well because my breathing muscle was shocked. It was in spasm, and it hurt. And I couldn't do much about it because that muscle is inside the body. Eventually, I figured out how to release that spasm through some pressure points along the rib cage. But that definitely gave me a fair amount of grief. The reason why that particular method of breathing caused me such discomfort and pain also was because I was using perhaps too much force. What does it mean to use power instead of force when it comes to breathing? Essentially, it boils down to being natural. If you are doing something too forcefully, probably it's because you are trying to do things that you think should be done instead of allowing nature to take its course. So it's very important to allow what's natural for you to manifest spontaneously. When it comes to physiology, your body knows really well how to breathe. However, there are perhaps some ways to improve that. There's always room for improvement. Whenever I begin to work with doing breathing practices with a person whose breathing muscles are not very well trained, they often inhale and exhale unevenly. In other words, it's almost like a sobbing breath. When you sob, often there is a certain pause and then more inhalation and then pause and a little more inhalation. Obviously, this is the result of muscles not being well trained. What happens when your muscles are well trained? They perform smoothly and powerfully. If you look at the way babies breathe, they mostly breathe moving their stomachs in and out, distending the stomachs when inhaling and flattening when exhaling. It's a natural respiration that most people experience spontaneously at that age. At the age of like 0 to 5 years of age, maybe to 7 or 8 years of age, most children breathe completely naturally. We don't need to teach children how to breathe. They do fabulously. When the child is encountering the way that other people do things, that includes breathing. Obviously, it's a very unconscious learning process. The child doesn't think, I'm going to breathe like my dad does. The child simply sees how adults do, and monkey see, monkey do. The child basically follows suit. By the age of 12, 15, often kids don't have a very effective way to breathe. As a matter of fact, that's why some of them have such a hard time with sports. But, it's not the only diaphragm here. There is another diaphragm at the bottom of the abdominal cavity. And we can use that diaphragm instead of distending the stomach that much. We can move the internal organs in the abdominal cavity up and down. They're like moving like a piston in a cylinder. When the thoracic diaphragm contracts, it pushes the internal organs down. Relaxing the pelvic diaphragm at the same time allows the internal organs to move further down towards the bottom of the pelvic floor. Then, when you exhale, the pelvic floor muscles contract, push on the internal organs as the thoracic diaphragm relaxes at the same time. That creates pressure in the lungs, expelling the air out of the lungs. What happens when you breathe in this way? You literally engage certain muscles of your body that you perhaps didn't even know existed. Even if you did know that you had muscles in the pelvic floor, for example, some people have done some Kegel exercises training the PC muscle, pubic muscle. I'm not going to throw any more Latin terminology at you today, I promise. The PC muscle, essentially, it can be consciously contracted and relaxed. For example, if you contract your anus and make yourself feel as though you're holding in so that you wouldn't go to the bathroom. Now, that is the contraction of the pelvic floor that also pushes the internal organs a little bit upwards. If you release the tension in the pelvic floor muscles, the organs drop down. Some people have the organs dropping down way too much. That's usually because the pelvic floor muscle is underdeveloped. What happens if the pelvic floor muscles are underdeveloped? The pelvic diaphragm is not functioning. Well, they obviously can't engage this muscle in the breathing process, and they may also have prolapse, vaginal prolapse, rectal prolapse. They may have a variety of other issues with the internal organs and reproductive system. We can go into that in greater detail in our future programs as well. One more myth that I wanted to bring up today is the so-called reverse breathing. Now, in order to be able to discuss that, I invite my friends and colleague, Craig Payton. Thank you, Craig. So, would you share with us a little bit about the reasons why some people practice reverse breathing?
Well, I know that reverse breathing is encountered in many different schools of Qigong, and I have experience with a few of them. And I can say that I'm familiar with some of the reasons. I wouldn't want to say that I could comprehensively answer that question as for all schools.
Sure.
Now, the reasons that I understand for engaging in reverse breathing are often associated with iron shirt or golden belt training. In other words, the objective being to create greater ability to withstand blows in the body, and also to strengthen the internal organs and the fascia. This is often achieved through what's called packing process breathing. So,
what is that?
Well, theoretically, let's just contrast with abdominal breathing. Abdominal breathing is as you breathe in, the abdomen relaxes and the diaphragm moves down, and in order to create room for the lungs to expand both up and down. This is typical or ordinary abdominal breathing.
And it pushes the internal organs a little bit downwards, then the stomach may distend because the muscles of the abdomen and the obliques are more relaxed.
Correct. Yes, this is abdominal breathing. So reverse breathing would be breathing in and consciously contracting the muscles of the abs, the trunk, to contract in at the same time that the diaphragm is moving down to allow for more oxygen to get into the lungs, thereby, theoretically again, creating more pressure in the lower abdomen.
We know that most of the organs in our abdomen are made pretty much of water. They don't really have much air unless you have gas. Yes. So it may facilitate some passing of the gas, but the water doesn't, fluids in general do not get compressed. You cannot compress water to smaller volume. So obviously if the volume stays the same and you push the diaphragm down and you squeeze the internal organs from the sides, obviously they will have to drop down.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the point about the lower diaphragm. I believe most schools of Qigong emphasize pulling up or making firm, at the very least, this structure, so that at the same time the diaphragm is open to bring in air, you will be contracting from the floor of the trunk as well as the abdomen. So again, the idea is to seal off the whole area to create this increased pressure and to focus the qi, whether it be in the dantian or whether it be in one of the individual organ structures. And so again, the theory being that this will vitalize and strengthen the organs in question, or vitalize and strengthen the fascia in order to create more ability to withstand damage.
So where do those poor organs go if they're being squeezed pretty much from all directions? They cannot get compressed, we understand that. So what happens to them? Do we fool ourselves thinking that they get compressed? We talk about pressure probably meaning tension. In other words, what feels like pressure probably is just tense muscles and abdomen. You cannot compress fluids, but it creates the sensation of pressure just because you feel like you're squeezing yourself into a tighter ball. Okay, so if the internal organs can't go anywhere, obviously they will be restricting the movement of the diaphragm down. Now, if the diaphragm cannot really go down, then the inhalation will happen pretty much in the upper lobes of the lungs by pulling the upper ribs upwards and inhaling mostly in the upper chest. Is that right?
Well, it makes logical sense.
Well, I want to be reasonable here. So, would you demonstrate to us the reverse breathing for a change?
Okay, so breathing in, and at the same time breathing in, I'm contracting. It looks like this. And I'm going to hold my breath a little bit.
Okay.
So,
just don't pass out here.
So the abdomen has not expanded out. I have maintained pressure in the urogenital diaphragm, and so I'm releasing it.
So what you just did was moving your shoulders up and down. Were you releasing or were you actually inhaling?
That was the release. So let's demonstrate.
Let's do it again, maybe in the full cycle.
Regular breath in and out, followed by reverse breath.
I see your abdomen going further.
Yeah.
That's supposed to
That's
stick
excellent.
out.
That's excellent. Okay. So let's repeat. Now, as I indicated to you, and the reason I'm using the term theory, I found, as I believe you have expressed, a large degree of unnaturalness. And therefore, I practiced a little bit and discarded it as something.
I'm totally with you on that.
Yeah.
And one of the things about unnaturalness is that when you try to observe how the person is breathing in this way, on exhalation, when they release the air out of your lungs, something has to push the air out. But if the diaphragm doesn't move upwards because you're actually supposed to distend your stomach on exhalation, something else has to push the air out of your lungs. What would that be? Well, that would be muscles between the ribs called intercostals. They usually don't get a lot of training, so maybe this is a nice way to train intercostals. Those are the muscles that you eat if you eat spare ribs. Basically, those are the little muscles between the ribs. They're tiny, easy to get into spasm. So please be careful not to overdo this if you decide to experiment with reverse breathing, okay?
It's not so much a function of distending the belly upon exhale as it is just letting go. So if I'm pulling in and concentrating on pulling in as I'm breathing in, theoretically to increase the intra-abdominal pressure, then instead of just sticking my belly out on exhale, I'm really just letting it go. I'm not really trying to.
That's how I observe many people who practice abdominal breathing do it. They literally distend their stomach on exhalation, or at least try to, which obviously requires a tremendous amount of effort from the muscles that aren't really designed by nature to be used for this purpose. Now, how about the packing exercise that you mentioned?
Okay, well, again, the packing process is something that I experimented with and discarded as being very unnatural, and I didn't go very far into it. However, I can
be healthier than being natural. So if you do something that is unnatural or contrived, it's likely to lead to results that are less than optimal.
Yeah, so to go further to describe the packing process of breathing as I understand it, and as it is done, I believe in more than one school that I've been exposed to. The idea is to go further. What the reverse breathing does is theoretically create increased intra-abdominal pressure, and therefore helps pack qi more generally into the abdomen. And there's going to be more energy concentrated in this place. So I think it's a very valid point, and I don't know any Qigong school that would disagree with this point. Okay, so packing is is a physiological process, and it's also a visualization process. Mm-hmm. So when we visualize putting qi into a particular organ, we're also going to do a packing process where we do the reverse breathing, but repeatedly suck in more breath. So, for example, breathing in, using reverse breathing, and then holding for a bit of time, and then more and more. Doing this repeatedly, and then relaxing. And then there are different visualizations, there are different recirculating of the energy in follow-up to this. And it's supposed to be tonifying to, first of all, the fascial layers, and tonifying and strengthening to the fascia around the organs and ultimately the health of the organs themselves. I believe that the theory of Yidao Qidao would demonstrate that putting attention in the organs is going to be potentially beneficial, just to give them that attention. And I feel very confident in that theory, both from a Qidao perspective and from the perspective of some of the schools I've studied outside of this. However, the idea of packing, that idea has been explored as to whether or not it may be unnatural or detrimental or something which unduly increases blood pressure, and all these things I think are valid points and need to be explored. And I know that we talk about this, and one of the things that I'm interested in is how do we test? How do we see whether or not this is actually doing what the theory says it's supposed to be doing?
Exactly. And this is one of my favorite things to do, to test things. As I mentioned, that we are exploring some of the myths and some of the mistakes that people make. Well, I don't know if this is a mistake to practice reverse breathing. I don't want to talk you out of it. It certainly is a myth that the reverse breathing is going to be particularly healthy for you. Few masters who I've interviewed said that they practice reverse breathing for the purpose of martial arts power. And when I ask what kind of power they get, usually they make references to either iron shirt or golden belt techniques. And these are the techniques that allow you to withstand strikes and punches and kicks and even stabs with sharp objects and weapons and not be harmed, or at least not as harmed as it could be. Then I say usually, well, would you mind me testing how it works? Let's see if you take my punch without doing anything and with this particular technique. And by and large, people don't really withstand my punches because my punches are pretty strong punches. Now, of course, I can also tap lighter and make them feel a little bit more comfortable with this type of strike. And then make it a little bit stronger and stronger. And ask them, what are they doing to withstand stronger punches? And by and large, it is not the reverse breathing. Now, in our next webinar, we will actually explore exactly this subject matter. And we'll also do a little bit more of a demonstration of how we test the ability to withstand strikes, punches, and a variety of other energy projections. So all of these I consider not just punches, because this is like taking it for the face out. We consider this as energy projection. And if somebody's projecting energy at you, well, you'll have to deal with it somehow. We'll have another webinar dedicated to that. Please stay tuned. To wrap up our event today, I want to invite you to consider the possibility that there is room for improvement in any type of breathing technique. Even that technique that I mentioned to you, engaging both thoracic and pelvic diaphragms in breathing, working one against the other, one relaxing, the other contracting at the same time, one contracting, the opposite relaxing, moving the internal organs up and down the abdominal cavity. I'm sure there are ways to improve upon this technique, and I would love to hear from you about your experiences using this particular breathing technique or any other breathing method that you have done or you decide to do. On this page, you can leave comments. Please do so, and I will be happy to answer any questions that you come up with or hear about your experiences. Any words of wisdom, Craig, to wrap up our event today?
Well, I would just say that keep an open mind, keep exploring, and always be willing to learn.
Thank you. As I promised to you in the beginning of this webinar, I would like to offer you a very simple and extremely powerful breathing exercise that is very natural and at the same time almost always overlooked. As a matter of fact, most people spontaneously experience it virtually every day without knowing about it. But when they catch themselves doing it, they feel uncomfortable or even shy. It's called yawning. Yawning is a natural meditative breath. If you ever paid attention to what happens to consciousness during the yawn, You may have noticed that you can't think when you are yawning. There is a point in time during the yawn when your mind becomes blank. That's exactly what I invite you to experiment with as a meditative breath that can be facilitated. You can catch yourself yawning during the day, and instead of suppressing the yawn, like many people tend to do, or apologizing as if there's doing something wrong, or even clenching the jaws so that you give yourself a TMJ tension, instead you can allow yourself to experience yawning fully, and also you can facilitate it when you have a moment to experience deeper meditation practice. That's right. You can yawn at will. As a matter of fact, many people say that when I just start talking about yawning, they already start yawning. So if you're feeling like yawning right now, do yourself a favor and enjoy the deep and satisfying yawn. How exactly do you use such a natural occurrence that happens to most of us virtually every day? Well, we don't have to wait for it to occur. We can actually make it happen at will. How do you make yourself yawn? And why would you do it? Why would you want to make yourself yawn? It's because when you yawn, there is a moment in time when your mind cannot think. If you pay attention to how your constant flow of thoughts is interrupted during the yawn, you may notice that there is an amazing meditation experience that happens to you spontaneously. In that moment when you are yawning and your mind doesn't have any thoughts in it, you enter a deep meditative state, something that many meditators would kill for. They've been practicing meditation perhaps for years or even decades to experience this freedom from thought. Now you can experience it on a regular basis because I'm going to share with you how to facilitate yawning. That's right. You don't have to wait for yawn to occur. You can actually make it happen. And it's easier than you may think. Many people say that yawning is contagious. So just talking about it already may instigate a yawn. If you're not yawning yet, you may find yourself yawning when you see me yawn, because it's also very contagious. How do I make myself yawn? First of all, bringing the tip of the tongue to the roof of your mouth, you can complete the circulation of energy down the conception vessel and up the governing vessel, Dumai and the Ranmai, that comprise the macrocosmic orbit. When you bring the tip of the tongue to the roof of your mouth, keep your mouth slightly open, but continue breathing through the nose. Now, that may sound a little strange. Why would you keep your mouth open? But believe me, this is actually going to instigate a yawn. Just like this. It was absolutely an authentic yawn that I facilitated by doing exactly what I just described. Bringing the tip of my tongue to the roof of my mouth, breathing through the nose while keeping the mouth slightly ajar. Now, of course, when I start yawning, I forget about the roof of my mouth, breathing through the nose, or keeping the mouth at a certain level of openness. I just yawn. What happens in the body is that it inhales, contracting many muscles throughout the entire organism, including the diaphragm. When the diaphragm contracts, it opens the volume in the chest cavity, allowing the lungs to fill up with air. Now, they will fill up often to full capacity that you may have a hard time experiencing when you're just doing some regular breathing exercises. And of course, once you're done inhaling, your body will naturally exhale. And the moment when your mind doesn't think usually occurs in that pause between inhalation and exhalation during the yawn. When you exhale, it is usually associated with muscles relaxing, especially the diaphragm. It's also something we can use to facilitate relaxation of the muscles. So we contract them first, and then we release the tension. So this is something that can be done globally throughout the entire organism, or it can be done in regard to a particular muscle or muscle group. Before we go into that, let me just encourage you to experiment with yawning at will. So you simply bring the tip of the tongue to the roof of your mouth, keep your mouth slightly ajar, but breathe through the nose. That's right. Yawning just happens. Sometimes you may notice that your eyes start watering, which is a pretty clear indication that you're entering an altered state of consciousness. What also happens sometimes is the sigh or a sound that you emit when you exhale and when you complete a yawn. This is a natural mantra. You don't have to memorize any particular syllables. You don't have to ascribe to them any spiritual meaning. You simply allow the body to do what it naturally does and allow what's natural for you to guide you in the spontaneous meditation practice that occurs simply because your mind cannot think when you yawn. This moment of empty mind, clear of thoughts, may last just a second or two when you yawn. But with practice, you will notice that it may take a minute or several minutes, and eventually you will discover that it has a cumulative effect. I literally can stop thinking whenever I want. The skill that I developed very much as a result of this particular yawning practice. I invite you to enjoy it fully and leave your comments below, as well as use the button below this video, or perhaps on the side of this video depending on where you're watching it, to register for our Tai Chi coaching program, which is starting right now, and it will go for 6 months. And during this 6-month period of time, you will be receiving regular group coaching sessions from me, as well as additional digital materials, video and audio downloads that you will be able to use for deepening your understanding of the principles underlying all styles of Qigong, Tai Chi, and other internal arts. This is also a program that is designed to be suitable for anyone regardless of the level of experience. Whether you have years of training or you are a rank and file beginner, you will be able to benefit from it. And by the time you complete this program, 6 months from now, you will find yourself at much higher level of mastery. And to make the enrollment into this program a total no-brainer for you, for just $1, you can go through the entire month of my coaching. If you like this program and you want to continue, you will not need to do anything. You will just simply continue automatic payments for the next 5 months. And this program also has a 30 days guarantee. If you do not like the first month of our coaching, you will be able to cancel at any time. I'll be happy to refund you that $1. So, what are you waiting for? Please click the button below this video and register for this program today. I look forward to working with you.